think, yeah. Morning. I think we'll go ahead and get started. I want to make a quick transition. It's, well, of course, it's Trinity Sunday, in case we missed it this morning. And what is interesting, in particularly in terms of um, Pastor Angela's sermon, um, in some respects, all of us have creeds. We have creeds, whether or not we have the formal creeds such as the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed or the Athanasian Creed. And what is helpful as a way of transitioning to what we're going to do is to even think, perhaps because we have gathered here in the last several weeks for these studies, is to, you know how I feel about language by now. And to think of even the background of not just creeds in general, but actually of the word itself. And to think about, it's one of these words, as is so often the case, that has sort of evolved over time. And it has come, we know the Romance languages, you know, obviously, Spanish and French and Italian and so on. I have come to use, in a way, the root of this word to mean what? Right, literally, what we believe. The Nicene Creed begins with what word? It begins with we, right? As a collective confession, apostles as an I, okay? But it follows by believe. Except, of course, for one slight issue. That's not the root of the word. It's come to mean that. The root of the word is something that all of us are familiar with, but may not connect it with the word creed. It's the root that gives us words like, actually, cardiac. It's the same Latin root. Okay? Or those of us, I think in this group I can safely say, who once upon a time used to write actual letters to people, okay? With ink. And we would sign off, not always, but often, with a word that says what? Cordially. Again, it's the same root. Okay? By now, you could sort of conclude that the word has to do with what? The heart. Okay? The road that runs through Jerusalem, which they discovered, by the way, just a few decades ago, literally right through Jerusalem, that road is called what? The Cardo. Guess why? It goes right through the heart of the city, okay? And several other cities have this. And this is all by way of saying, when we think of creed, it's the concept of credo that's what? Here's what I would suggest. If we say we believe something, we must by definition mean that what? We give our hearts to it. That's what it comes down to. So what do you give your heart to? And that's what we think of creed. So that's by way of transition. Secondly, we left off last time with the Cain and Abel story. And I want to say one last reminder about that story. And I think it's one of these that, in my estimation, is worth remembering. And that is the idea of this. In that story, there are 3 P's that I would propose we remember. Okay? 1, before all else, there is a promise, which I'll remind us. Secondly, there is punishment. And third, there is protection. And so you may recall that the word that we sort of discussed just briefly, the Hebrew word transliterated, it's pronounced Timshale. And it's the word, in case if you were not here last time, it's the word that comes at the end of John Steinbeck's novel, East of Eden. Okay? It's one of the final words in that lengthy novel. And by the way, it's not translated, it's actually in Hebrew, transliterated. And it literally means, you may. You have within you the capacity to overcome. And it's talking about, it's a very striking image. It's about sin lurking behind the door. Okay? It's a kind of almost an anthropomorphic idea of sin as waiting to pounce. But that you have the capacity to overcome that. You may, and this is to Cain. You may overcome this. In other words, you don't have to give in to the idea that because it's lurking there, it will simply conquer you. You may do this. So there is a promise that you may do this. But when you go around and killing your brother, right, as in fratricide, right, there is punishment. But interestingly, Cain is punished, but is not killed. But there's also protection that anyone who goes on to actually kill him, let's say because of what you have done, you deserve to die, okay, that person will meet with punishment. So that's where we ended up last time, if you will, all right? The idea that there is a promise. We don't think about this. They are speaking of questions from this morning, right? There are a ton of questions in all of these texts. In the Cain and Abel narrative, there are a ton of questions. Why is it that God does not intervene? These are hard questions. Every time we raise questions about the divine, these are difficult questions. But here's what I want to propose. We should raise questions. And the difficult ones are raising questions, God, what's going on? Now, here, some folks might say, I don't think us in this room, but some folks might say, well, you know, if you raise a question about God, it means that what? Your faith is weak. Okay? How could you... And actually, I think it is exactly the opposite. That is, because we believe in the strength of this relationship, we would dare raise a question. Okay? And let me remind you, and this is a reminder because you already know this, okay? Let me remind you, all right? One of the words, one of the last 7 words on the cross is in the form of a question. Do you remember that question? My God, why have you forsaken me? Right? You remember what the answer was? By the way, this question is a trick question. There was none. Okay? The question is left out there as a question. And it comes right out of Psalm 22. All right? My God, why have you forsaken me? Okay? By the way, if we're asking tough questions, I think this one is right up there. Okay? And if we're talking about Trinity and the Son, the second person of the Trinity is asking the first person of the Trinity, why have you forsaken? I think this is a big question. So I think we're in good company here, so to speak, in asking the tough questions. So why doesn't God intervene? Actually, we don't know. Why does God accept one offering over against another? In the text, there is no answer. It just says, God accepted the offering of Abel, but not Cain. And we don't know why. Now, we can extrapolate, which is what, of course, many of us do. It's not a bad thing. And we conclude, well, maybe God preferred the first of the animals. as an offering, as opposed to the fruit or the vegetables or the stuff that comes out of the earth. Because those were the two. I accept one, I don't accept the other. But why? And we don't know. And this is how it ends, all right? So now, as we move on, which is kind of looking at the way I'm dealing with Genesis here, it's sort of seeing all of Europe in 24 hours, okay? But we're not even touching the Noah story, obviously, right? Moving on. And there is much there, as we well know. But this is not a technical way to describe this, but this particular text here now, the Tower of Babel, is something of a transitional text. Before we get to what is called the primeval stories, creation, and then to the Abraham narratives, here in chapter 11 is this text, which we know. And I want to say just for a couple of words about this text. And by the way, this is the text that, of course, was referenced last week because of Pentecost, right? It's sort of, on the one hand, there is this. On the other hand, there is Acts, chapter 2, all right? And often, these are the two texts that go hand in hand. And according to this text, the whole earth, had one language and the same words. And what did the people say? Okay, I think we should make a name for ourselves. It is one of the few, actually it's the only place, and it's certainly the first place in all of Scripture, where unity as sort of as an idea is rejected. Okay? Now someone might say it's uniformity, which I've never really thought of as really a guiding virtue. It's not. We don't all have to be alike. Okay? But we have to be united in some things, to be sure. Okay? But actually here, setting yourself apart from the rest of the world so that we could make a name for ourselves, God says what? No. Okay? So all of a sudden, scattering becomes preferable to unity. Okay? And now, so if we take this out of context, someone might say, are you saying that to be united is a bad thing? No. But to set yourselves apart, because you, by the way, you're going to make it, and you're also going to build something into the heavens, right? To reach into the heavens. There is something fundamentally, according to the text, that is wrong. But look at what it says. And again, it's intriguing, okay? But being Trinity Sunday, we'll play with this a little bit. The second sentence there says, come, let us go down, confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. Who is us? The Trinity? But of course, in Genesis, there is no Trinity. All right? We are reading, the Spirit is there. So we are reading back into the text, right? And as we heard this morning, it's not new, right? First of all, in the Bible, the word Trinity does not even exist. Just the concept is there, obviously, right? In the New Testament with the pneuma, the Spirit coming, with Jesus, of course, sending the Spirit. Well, it could be God and the angels, right? It could be God and the angels, but again, we don't know. It just says, who is up there? By the way, what we know also from the Gospel of John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God in the beginning. Okay, in my own university, in the archway that sort of, it's the entrance into what they call the quads. You know, in Britain, all these magnificent quads, right? The archway. Over the archway, as you enter into the quad, in my own, in my university where the one area that I was involved with, it has there actually engraved, not just written, but deeply engraved for 600 years, in principio erat verbum. Okay? In the beginning was the Word. Okay? It's right there. In case you're wondering where you're entering into, that's where you're entering into. Okay? In the beginning was the Word. But also, we know that we are told that wisdom was with God from where? The beginning. Okay? And wisdom, of course, throughout the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, is what gender? Feminine. Okay? So we have ideas as to who the us is. Okay? Well, and we can draw our conclusions. It could be angels. It could be wisdom. It could be a reference to the Word, of course, right? So that they will not understand. And this is what I want to spend just a moment focusing on. In order for us to understand, to begin to understand, if not fully, but at least to begin to understand each other, we must first of all must do what? At a minimum, we have to first listen. Listen. Now, I don't want to parse this too much, but for me, listening has an entirely different active quality than hearing. Okay? For me, hearing is an auditory skill, quality that we have. Okay? If I say, I can't hear you, it might very well be, guess what? Because I can't hear you. But listening is active. Okay? That's the word that is used there. I will confuse their language so they do not understand. Actually, the Hebrew there is that they will not be listening to each other. Literally is what it says. It's the word, you know, the Jewish concept of Shema, okay, which is, speaking of creed, is probably the quintessential confessional statement in Judaism, okay? Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one. Okay? Very sort of Trinitarian in a way. Okay? That's the word that is used there. Okay? Shema, Shema. I will confuse their language so that they do not listen to each other. You want to really create havoc among the people? Don't listen to one another. Thankfully, of course, as a nation, we always listen to each other, right? Generally, that has not been so that they don't understand. And at least in the church, acts as a counter to this. And that is, yes, we will have multiple languages, but that we will all understand each other in our own. By the way, if you think about it, right, it's an absolutely mind-boggling concept. It's not just I understand you because as you speaking in Croatian, I happen to be a Croatian. No, by the way, I'm not. I'm just saying, okay? And that I understand you in Croatian. No, I will understand you in my own language. Okay? And that's generally been the way. I think the emphasis here has been, I will scatter you. You do not have the luxury of setting up sort of a separate identity of your own that is above and beyond everyone else. Who might everyone else be? No, I will scatter you. It's one of these sort of rare instances. Again, in Genesis, we discover a couple of things that are done by God in a way that is really surprising. Where we have, it is good, it is good, it is good, and then what? It's not good, okay? Not because I think it's not good, but because God is reflecting that, you know what, it's just not good. I got to do something about this. Here, right? By the way, we skipped over the Noah story. One of the things that we as parents, we don't ever want to, this is just us, as Vera and myself, but that we don't ever want to say, we don't want to think, but let alone say to our children, is what? I don't want ever to use the D word with my children, which is disappointed. I don't ever want to tell my children, I'm disappointed in you. It's one of these things, you know, it's kind of like taking back the sound of a bell, right? There is no taking that back. Or as the British would love to say, the spoken word is like a sped arrow. Okay? Once it's gone, it's gone. Yet we can do all kinds of things after that, but it's gone. Here's the thing. We don't know what is going on here. Okay? What we do know is that they will begin to understand each other, and it may not always be about the spoken word. It might simply be an understanding that maybe a scattering is actually a quality. You remember the Noah story? Why did the flood destroy the people? The D word. Imagine God saying, you know what, I'm really disappointed in you. I'm going to start over. I mean, we are not even at Genesis 11. We're not at Genesis 12. And one, things are not good. Two, oh, I'm disappointed. Three, you know, I think I'm going to have to sort of confuse them a little bit, scattering. Okay? And this is all from the impetus of God. And let's not get carried away. It's not as if Noah was some great guy. He was deeply flawed, as you all know, right? But God is saying, you know, this is what we've got. This is what we've got. We've got to work with what we've got. I mean, and it's one thing, you know, for us as human beings to say, yeah, you know, it's what we've got. Yeah, you know, the clay is okay, but, you know, we're going to have to. But here's God saying, yeah, this is what we've got, you know. So then we move on. And here's what I want to focus on. Sarai, Abram's wife, and let me just say a word very quickly about names here. Typically, scholars have understood Sarai to mean, anyone? Princess. Okay? And Sarah, which is just a little bit different, actually changes that a little bit to mean the princess. Okay? As scholars understand it. And then we get to Abraham, which is even more instructive. Because before there was Abraham, there was what? Abram. Right? Now, again, to move away from Hebrew just for a moment, all right? You and I probably know the Aramaic word more than the Hebrew here, because the Aramaic word for father is what? Abba, all right? We don't get too many of those in the New Testament, but we have it there, all right? Abba meaning father, okay? Abba, father. And we have large chunks of Aramaic text in the Old Testament. We can't really, unless you read Hebrew, you probably won't recognize it because it's the same alphabet. It looks just like everything else, all right? But Abba means father. In Hebrew, it's not Abba, but this, okay? Ab or Av. Occasionally, you will hear a Jewish person by the name of Avram, all right? Because V and B is the same letter in Hebrew. All right? or can be pronounced in the same way depending how it's used. Let me put it that way. So Abram, all right, literally means, the word Ram means high or exalted. Abram or Abram means exalted father. That's literally what it means. When his name changes to Abraham, it changes to the father of many, or the father of multitudes, all right? As he gives, as his son Isaac, we'll see, comes into being. So these names are not, and we see it in the New Testament, right? You know, Peter changed from Cephas to Peter, Peter meaning, of course, we know the Latin Petra, right, as in petrified rock. Right? So Sarah, Abram's wife, they had no children, so it was her idea to her husband, Abram, that I think you should go and sleep with our maid, or slave woman, or servant woman, Hagar, or Hagar. And she is often, I don't mean us in here, but in so many different quarters, is often omitted from this narrative, which, by the way, is just on the surface a terrible thing, because she's very much a part of this narrative. But secondly, you take her out of this narrative and you lose a major chunk of the story. So it is Sarah who says, I want children to the point where if I can't have a child, I want you to have a child. By the way, much has been written about this, and the language of surrogacy through someone else. Okay, it's one of the early references to that. Because the Lord has prevented me from having children, it may be, right? If all goes well, it may be that I could have a child through her. So, Abraham, what a guy, huh? Yeah. I mean, what a guy. She says, go and sleep with the servant. And he says, if that's what you want. Okay? By the way, I'm not editing this text. Okay? Now, these are certainly excerpts, but Abram listens to the voice of Sarai. All right? He listened to the voice of Sarai. Let's not get carried away. This is one of those isolated moments, right? He listened to the voice of Sarah. He went into Hagar, and she conceived. By the way, very much, remember we talked about this several weeks ago. Remember that phrase from Caesar, Veni Vidi Vinci, right? Almost like a hint of this. He went, he saw, David did the same thing, by the way, remember, with Bathsheba? He saw, he took, and before you know it, hello, I'm pregnant. Okay? Here, he went in, and she is pregnant. And she looked with contempt. And by the way, this is not an assignment for you. Go, when you have some time, go and look at the various translations of this text. And you will see that contempt is often used, but a variety of different because it's not, what is she going to look with contempt? But she she felt like she had been able to do something. It's hard to capture it in English. But it could be, I'm pregnant and you're not, okay? Or I can be pregnant and you can be, kind of idea. But here's the thing. We don't quite know what that look was. And you know and I know, all right, that not everything that we say and that we mean is actually heard in the same way. Okay? People, sometimes we hear things that we want to hear. Okay? I might say, you know, that might not work. And all you hear from me is that, did you say might? So it means that it could? Okay? No, what I mean, it's not ever, ever in this life going to work. Okay? But what you're hearing is that, oh, well, maybe. So there is this idea that, you know, maybe Sarah is seeing something that was not intended. But she is pregnant, Hagar. And then we skip down. And Abram said to Sarai, she looked with contempt, by the way. And Sarah says, you got to do something about this. She's saying to Abram, you got to do something about this. You know, what have you done? And by the way, you want to stop the text right there and say, excuse me, this was your idea. But she says to Abraham, I cannot believe that you could do this to me. Where's the justice in this? Now she's looking with contempt on me. How could you do this to me? And every time you read that, you want to pause and say, you know, remember, this was your idea just a few minutes ago? Or, by the way, a minute is like 9 months. But, okay. And he says to her, listen, she's your slave girl. She is in your power. Do to her as you please. Wow. In Hebrew, it actually doesn't say that, as you please. Which gives you the impression that, you know what, do with her, do whatever. Literally, the Hebrew says, if we were to translate it verbatim, it says something like, do to her that which is good in your eyes. That's what it says. And the word good there is the same word we see in Genesis creation. Remember? It's in Hebrew it's pronounced tov. Do that which is good in your eyes. I'm leaving it to you. Implicit, I trust your judgment. By the way, evidently your judgment has not been that good to this point. And then Sarah dealt harshly with her, and she ran away. I will say this about this text. We don't know how Hagar ended up in the household of Abraham and Sarah. We believe that she came out of Egypt, and that's why she plays an incredibly important role to this day. Particularly, I think in scholars generally, but particularly with African Americans. And they see Hagar as an African person coming out of Egypt, perhaps taken by Abraham and Sarah. So I want for us to pause for a second. She is entirely at the mercy in a foreign place. She is entirely dependent. And now she's pregnant. And Abraham is saying, do to her that which is good in your eyes. And look at the last line there. And Sarah dealt harshly with her, and she ran away. We'll talk about her running away. Where do you run to? But the word harshly here, to put it in context, is not uncommon. It's used elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible in the Old Testament. But I want to point out one other place that would contextualize it for us. This is exactly the word that is used when the Israelites are in Egypt, and it describes how Pharaoh dealt with them. They were dealt with harshly. It's the same word. So in case we're wondering what harsh means, it feels almost with that kind of heavy burden. That's how Sarah dealt with her, to the point where the only thing that is left for me to do is to do what? To run away. To run away. She dealt harshly with her. So, and that's enough to just beat the fool out of her. Except we don't even know what contempt means. That's, yes, exactly, right? But it, just to put it in context, right? Again, at this point, I'm not saying overall, at this point, Sarah's judgment is less than ideal here, okay? The only thing that motivates her is what? I want a child. I want a child. I'm 80, and I think it's probably a little late, but I want a child. I can have a child through, right, surrogacy. But now, you know, I'm seeing that this slave woman has something that I could never have. I mean, that's the perception. And she has to go. And she runs away. Where does she run to, by the way? Did you say Denver? Desert. Oh, desert. Oh, I thought, oh. Desert. I'm thinking, how did she end up in Denver? I like that. In the desert, in the wilderness, right? And by the way, when we think of the wilderness, I mean, pause for a second. What image comes to mind? I mean, just in general, not hardships. Hardships. No water. Okay, you can see the scraggly stuff in the Holy Land, right? No water, the wilderness. She's alone. We skipped over. She has a son now, by the way. We'll talk about him in a second. Little shelter. Utter death, yeah. Totally desolate, right? Destitute. She's now in the wilderness. What's the book that comes after Genesis? Just humor me here. Exodus, right? Which, of course, is really a Latin word, ex odos. Okay, literally means out of the road, from the journey on. But actually, in Hebrew, you know what it means? In the wilderness. Okay, bamidbar, in the wilderness. See, changes everything, doesn't it? So here is the thing. Okay, and we move into Numbers. They are in the wilderness. But here is what I want to say about the wilderness that I hope will change our impression just a little bit. Is it destitute? Yes. Is it alone? Yes. Okay. Is it, without food and drink? Yes. Are the prospects for survival great? No. But wilderness in the Bible can also provide what? Hope and newness. Okay? We see it, of course, Jesus being tempted in the wilderness, right? Okay? But we also see it in where is the new relationship between Israel and God in the Old Testament developed? In the wilderness. If you read the book of Hosea, it begins when the relationship is broken. The text says, according to the prophet, I will again woo. We don't use that word anymore. I will court Israel again. And I will begin where? In the wilderness. So it has the prospects of new beginnings in a way that goes beyond what the surface says. The surface says, you will die. Right? You're in the Sahara Desert. By the way, the word Sahara actually means desert. It's kind of like desert. It's like the Potomac River means what? Actually, the word Potomac actually means river. It's like same word as hippopotamus, river horse. Okay. I know I don't think they're going to change the name, but I'm just saying. So she's in the wilderness at this point. Okay? And then, of course, God appears. And God says, Hagar, slave girl of Sarah, where have you come from? By the way, I love the framing of this. We have all come from someplace and we're all going someplace. Now, you can rightly say, excuse me, Lord, you do know where I'm coming from here. You know. And you more than anyone else knows where I'm going, because I have no idea where I'm going. But again, remember, this is again with the Cain and Abel story. Cain, where is your brother? Right? And famously says, my brother's keeper. Okay, rhetorical question that in this case has to be answered anyway. Yes, you are. Okay, so there, you know, you have to sort of enter in yourself in this narrative. What has happened? And God takes Hagar seriously by asking this question. Where are you going? Do you have any idea where you're going? And then God says, here's the thing. You have conceived, you have born a son, or you shall bear a son, and you shall call him what? Ishmael. For the Lord has given heed to your affliction. Ishmael, meaning, by the way, by the time we have here, we're going to have some Hebrew here. Okay? Literally, the word is two words. Ishma, which is really the same root, Shema, and El, which you already know means what? God. It's the shortened form for the word God. El as in Elohim, as in Bethel, as in Michael, as in Gabriel, all of those El words, okay? El Shaddai, El Elyon, all of them. It means God. Literally, Ishmael means God hears or God listens. I want you to name your son Ishmael because I have heard you. I have seen your affliction. Okay? And then, by the way, it's not my translation. So I don't want you to leave here saying, what's he doing using the word ass in this text there? Okay? But that's what it says. And by the way, this is also what the New Testament says, that Jesus came riding into Jerusalem, remember? We've cleaned it up. It's now a donkey. But yeah, it's the same thing, all right? So when you think of wild, you might think someone out in, you know, kind of, right? Running, sort of crazy, running, you know, cannot be harnessed, you know, kind of thing. But as one scholar has pointed out, with which I agree, I wish I had thought about it, and what she said, actually don't think about it that way. Think about it in the context of Hagar, who is domesticated, who has no place, right? Who, by the way, is not what? Free. Because to be wild means that you could be free, that you could roam, that you could do whatever, right? So your son Ishmael is going to be free. He's not going to be trapped the way you have been or the way you are. And he will be wild. Now, I want to just jump ahead here. Let me go back here for a second. So now Hagar is gone. The child that she was hoping for is gone. And she's still alone, waiting for a child. But God has promised Sarah that, you know, don't worry, descendants will come. So Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age. By the way, I think old age here is a little bit of an understatement. Okay? At 100? Yeah. Okay? And God has brought laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. Now, those of us who read these texts and sometimes do commentaries on it, I would put in sort of in the margin here, I don't think everyone will be laughing with you here. At a certain Hagar and Ishmael probably are not giddy about this. Okay? But this is Sarah's impression. She has a child, and she names the child what? Isaac, which means laughter or he laughs, laughter, right? So now laughter has come. By the way, you're starting to see the juxtaposition here. Grief, affliction, wilderness, tears, death, as we will see, staring you. And here is laughter. And everyone will laugh with me. So the Hebrew word for laugh or laughter, let me rephrase that. The Hebrew word for Isaac, you know this word, but I want you now to connect. The Hebrew word for Isaac is, I'll give you a hint. He used to be a former prime minister of Israel, was assassinated years ago. Yitzhak. Okay? Yitzhak. That's the Hebrew word for Isaac. Yitzhak. I want you to hang on to that. Isaac's name is, I will name my son Yitzhak. Okay? Isaac. It's a beautiful name. Okay? And in fact, that's the way it's going to be. Now, everyone will laugh with me. So, exactly two different meanings. In this case, everyone will what? By the way, she imagines that this is a moment of celebration. They will laugh with her. Laughter has entered my world, and everyone will be joyful. I mean, that's the idea, right? Yeah. That she believes that everyone will. So back up now. I wanted to set the context. So here is the situation. We have these two brothers, right? This is before now. I know I'm going a little backwards here, but I want to show what's going on. So before Hagar has to leave, right? She has Ishmael, her son, right? Who probably about this time, if all of the mathematics goes according to what most of us believe, he's probably about, Ishmael is probably about 11, 12. Okay? When Yitzhak, Isaac, comes into being. And the brothers, are out doing what? What brothers are doing? They're playing. Out. No, I'm saying I wanted to jump ahead with that story for the wilderness to set it what happened, but no. This happens before she goes into the wilderness. Okay? I was just setting the scene. Okay? So I want to now tell you what led to that wilderness experience. So the boys are playing, right? Presumably for about a decade, Sarah doesn't know if she's going to have a child. And by the way, by child, what are we talking about? A son, right? A son. But here are the brothers playing. Presumably out, in the yard. As brothers do. And Sarah saw, look at the description. This is what the text says, not my translation. She saw this son of Hagar. Notice, this is not her son. Remember the son that she had hoped for? That she wanted? That she's willing to say to Abraham, go? All right? Now this son of Hagar, playing with her son Isaac. Here is what I want to focus on just for a few minutes before our time runs out. This particular word here has been scrutinized and has been translated and, in my view, absolutely misappropriated over the years. This will help us understand why. So she looks at the boys playing, the brothers playing, and she says to Abraham, cast out this slave woman with her son, because this slave woman shall not inherit with my son Isaac. She says to Abraham, get rid of them. Cast them out. They will end up in the wilderness. Okay. Cast them out. Why do you think she wants to cast them out? By the way, now this is not a rhetorical question. Why do you think that's the case? He was older. Okay. Okay. At least in theory, right? She is still a slave woman. Right? Right. Ishmael really would not be, quote, an inheritor. Remember the prodigal son story? Okay? Right. And we often think that it's going to be split 50-50. No, it's never split 50-50. The older son always, I'm the younger of two brothers, so I know what I'm talking about. Why do you think she wants to kick her out with her son? What did she see? Let me put it that way. What did she see looking out of her window or from her veranda or from her door? What did she see that would have propelled to make such a remarkable decision? Is it Abraham paying attention more? He is the first child, right? But do we know that? Right? We don't know that, do we? Right? All we are told is that she saw the boys playing and she said, get rid of it. Can't share my inheritance. Now, I don't know if you have sons who play together. I don't know if you have daughters and sons or daughters who play together. And you know they will fight, of course, right? If you have children who do not argue with each other, I think they're probably children who belong to someone else. Right? That's kind of part of our landscape. So, in order for this to make sense, you know what some translators and scholars have done? They've changed the word. Because they would say, it can't just be playing, it has to be something more. They were fighting. And because he is 11, 12, he's beating up on Isaac. Except for one slight problem. It doesn't say that. It says playing. One scholar, I kid you not, one scholar has gone as far as to say the older brother was sexually abusing the younger brother. All to justify why they should be kicked out. Because you have to have justification, right? Now, here's what I'm getting at. The word that is used here for playing, and I love this, is the word yitzhak. The brothers, by the way, the brothers were yitzhaking together. That's not an actual word. Okay? The brothers were laughing together. This is not me sort of massaging the word to mean that. That's the Hebrew word. The brothers were yitzhaking together. The brothers were laughing together, and Sarah could not stand it. Kick them out. And they end up in the wilderness. I have this up here because, of course, what do we have? Right? This is what we have, which, of course, what we have here, of course, is Abraham the father, and we have Ishmael, And out of Ishmael, the root to what? Islam and Muslims here. We have Isaac, rooted, that gives rise to, of course, Christianity. It doesn't look like an actual word, but that's. And so that's what I mean about first cousins. And by the way, there's no getting around it. And maybe this is also part of this extraordinary conflict that sometimes we have, right? Because it all goes back. Now, when you read the Quran, right, you will find Abraham, and you will find Sarah, and you will find Isaac, and you will find Ishmael, and you will find Hagar. You will also find Mary, and you will find Jesus, and you will find Moses. Okay? And one of the texts that we do not have the time to deal with is, of course, the so-called sacrifice of Isaac, which I find, in my view, to be one of the most painful texts that you will ever encounter in the Bible. Okay? But Muslims do not believe that it was Isaac. They believe that it was Ishmael. In the Bible it says, the beloved son, the son who he loved. Muslims believe it says the firstborn. And who is the firstborn? Ishmael. Okay? There's a parting of ways here. Who, and by the way, who gets sacrificed? Yeah, right? It's interesting. And Abraham is often seen as a man who cannot deal with connections and relationships. Keep in mind, I have to end here, but keep in mind that Ishmael has been banished, right? Together with his mother. Later on, what happens with Isaac? Right? In Judaism, by the way, they don't speak of the sacrifice of Isaac. They speak of the binding of Isaac. Okay? And if you want to know what that looks like, right? Sometimes when you're in your spare moment, go and look at pieces of art. Look at Rembrandt's sort of, depiction of the sacrifice of Isaac. And what you have is a young boy, right, there with a father, and in his hand, it says knife. It's actually, the Hebrew is more like a cleaver. Okay? It's a brutal text. And just for the record, after that incident with Isaac, according to the text, the father and the son are never together again. You can't find them in the text ever again. If I was Isaac, yeah, right? Never again. But the brothers do come together one more time. And it was for the funeral of Abraham. So Abraham gave them water and sent them and bread and sent them into the wilderness. It's not going to last very long. And before long, Ishmael is standing over here. He's all weak. There is no food. There is no water. And Hagar does something that is absolutely heartbreaking. She says, I cannot sit and look at the death of my child. And she walks away and sits at a distance so that she literally could not see her son die. And that's when an angel appears and provides water. We have to stop there. I don't know what the fall will bring for these studies, but obviously Genesis, we haven't spoken about Lot, who, by the way, is not something you want, not a person you want as your neighbor. I'm just going to say, okay? We haven't spoken about Sodom and Gomorrah. We haven't spoken about the sacrifice of, all of these things are yet to come. So if we have an opportunity, we might again deal with that. But for now, thank you so much for being a part of this.